Okay, Ms. Shapiro's back, my little animalcules. And so here we are, we're talking some more about populations. So we're gonna go over some definitions today. This is my favorite unit, so I'm really sad that you guys that are virtual are not viewing with me right now. Hopefully I'm still seeing you in class if you're watching these in a year that's not 2020. So the carrying capacity is the number of individuals that a given of a given species that a particular environment can support for an indefinite period of time. Okay, so and we symbolize that with the letter K. So both the environmental constraints and human impacts have an impact on K. We don't really know what the carrying capacity of the Earth is for humans. Some people think it's around 10 billion. Some people think it's a little bit more. Some people think it's a little bit less. And that's not really what we want to focus on. We want to focus on the quality of the life of the people that are living here on Earth. And so one formula that comes into account is the IPAT formula. This is probably not something that you're going to have to calculate. It's more just a value that like something to consider. So I doubt you would ever see them be like I is equal to this and P is equal to this, calculate A. Like that's not really what we're looking at. We want to talk about the overall influence, the overall impact the particular population is going to have. And that's what the IPAT formula tells us. So that influence, that impact is due to how big your population is, how affluent you are, meaning like how much stuff and what quality of standard of living. Hold on, my dog is barking like crazy. Okay, so we talked about the impact. P is population size, A is affluence. Like how high is your standard of living? And we're not talking about like, do you have an Xbox versus no Xbox? We're talking like Xbox versus live in a hut with no electricity kind of affluence. And then we also have to take into account technology. So that's like cars, that's like computers, that's like stuff that you have that helps you perform your day-to-day functions. It's not just technology like we use here in America. It's machines, it's cars, it's manufacturing processes, things like that, okay? So a single American family living an affluent lifestyle produces more pollution than the entire village of farmers in the third world. And again, we don't like to use the phrase third world, we're going to use the phrase developing. But really what we want to say is that it takes almost 250 times as many resources to raise a person in the United States as it does in other countries. And so we really need to look at how do we raise everybody up so that people aren't living such poor lives, but also how do we distribute resources so that everybody has a good life? And we're not talking like redistributing. We're just saying that we want to use things that we have carefully. Okay, so how would it be if everybody lived like you? And if you think back to the very beginning of the year, we calculated our ecological footprint. So that was how many Earths will we need to have in order to for everybody to live like us. And some of us got like 3 Earths, some of us got like 8 Earths. So those are all things that we need to think about, okay? So we alter our environment in order to meet our needs, right? We reduce biodiversity, we eliminate predators, we modify the habitat. We're changing water flow, we're changing water usage, and we're doing all these things. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. We just want to make sure that we're doing things in a way that keeps us able to be here for generations to come. Okay, and part of that, if you think back, remember how we talked about HIPCO, we talked about the impacts to biodiversity, we talked about invasive species, we talked about pollution, and we talked about the population growth of humans. And so that's the first thing that we need to address. And so we have to talk about fertility. How many babies are people having? Okay, you guys, your fertility is low, it's going to stay low. But we can talk about fertility in 2 ways. We want to talk about the replacement level fertility. This is the number of children that a couple is going to bear in order to replace themselves. And we need to talk about total fertility, or the total number or the average number of children that a woman is going to have in her childbearing years. Okay, and childbearing years is considered to be 15 to 40. So for example, the replacement level fertility in a developed country is 2.5. And I can actually, I'm going to write this out on the screen. So in a developed country, this is 2.1. In a developing country, this is 2.5. And so you might ask yourself, well, how can those numbers be different? And really what we see is because so many babies die in developing countries, they're likely to have children that are going to die before they reach child reproductive years. And so we have to take that into account. In developed countries, not as many babies die. So with that replacement level fertility is a little bit higher. Some still do. And so that's why we see it's not exactly 2. And so ultimately our goal is to reach that replacement level fertility. We don't want it to start to decline, that's bad, but we just want it to even out at an appropriate level. Okay, and so some other vocabulary terms, and I kind of alluded to this one, life expectancy. This is how long you can expect to live. We are the first, we meaning like you and I, as compared to like your grandparents, and your parents are probably closer to my age than I am to your age, which hurts my soul a little bit because, you know, I'm hip and young. So it makes me sad when I think about the fact that I'm not really, no cap. So life expectancy is the average number of years that an infant born can expect to live. And so we are the first generation, your parents and I, that will not live as long as our grandparents. And that has to do with drug use, that has to do with suicide rates, some of those. And it's not significant, but instead of being like 7 point or 75.8, I think it's down to like 74 point something. But we're kind of the first generation that's seen that life expectancy go down. And again, that's due to suicide and drug use. Infant mortality, this is the number of deaths of children under the age of 12 months that die before reaching their first birthday per 1,000 live births. So things like miscarriages or abortions are not considered in this infant mortality. These are only babies that were born alive that did not make it to their first birthday. If we want to take it all the way to the 5th birthday, we call that child mortality. And this is usually a mark of a developed country. Usually the lower the infant mortality rate, the higher the developed country. Although the United States actually has a remarkably high infant mortality rate. We have an infant mortality rate that's on par with places like Afghanistan, and that has to do with poor access to healthcare for teenagers that become pregnant, teenagers that are abusing drugs when they become pregnant, and lack of care when the babies are born. We also have a really high maternal mortality rate. That means we have a lot of women that are dying. And actually our infant mortality rate is low. That has to do, or I mean, is high for a developed country. And that again has to do with the drug use. I've misspoke. It's not on par with developing countries. Our maternal mortality rate, so how many moms are dying after giving birth, that is on par with developing countries. And that's because we typically tend to treat it as pretty routine, right? You're just having a baby, like you have the baby and like the next day they discharge you. Well, there are complications that arise that normally a woman would, that in other countries is dealt with, but in the United States, because it's so commonplace, we typically, I don't want to say we overlook it, but we just maybe don't give it the care and attention that it needs. So women are released and then they come back, they have complications and they end up passing away. And it's worse for women of color than it is for white women. Okay, the United States of America, our population continues to grow, and this has to do mainly with our immigration. Our total fertility rate has declined to a point where we're pretty comfortable with it, but our population grows due to immigration. Okay, so immigration and emigration play a large role in population dynamics. We can expect that developed countries will receive 20 million immigrants. And this is very controversial, and we're not going to wade into the politics of this. But those people are important in our economy, right? Guest workers perform jobs. They work in fields, they work in restaurants, they work in hospitality. They're paid very low wages, and they often do jobs that Americans don't want. However, we are concerned with them taking jobs away and overloading social services. So we don't want them to overcrowd our schools. We don't want them to utilize a lot of the resources. So it's this fine balance between ensuring that we have workers that are supporting the economy as well as not utilizing too many resources so that they're not being usurped. Okay. And so here again is just a picture of life expectancy. You can see that the United States has a very long life expectancy. Parts of Europe, Western Europe are very long. Russia is a little bit lower in the 60s. Parts of South America are in the 60s. Other countries, like I'm pretty sure this is Chile here, has just as big as the United States. I think this is Argentina and it's a little bit lower. We see some of the lower ones here in Africa in the 50s, here in the 40s, for example. This is where we talked about in the other video. This is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, etc. On average, global life expectancy is about 70 years. Okay, just another way of looking at it, life expectancy. Here's this GDP. We already talked about this at the beginning of the first video. Here's Qatar with their oil money. Here's the United States. And then here we have Burundi, Jordan, and so other countries that are over here. So it's just really interesting to look to see that as GNP or GDP, either one, increase, typically life expectancy increases, but that's not always the case. There are a few exceptions. Okay. Again, our goal is to reach this zero population growth. That's where our population is steady, not declining, just steady. All right, and I think with that, we will be finished with this video. I hope this was helpful and I will talk to you guys soon.